Hello, everybody. Welcome to our second of many Bigger Boat Visiting Writer Series readings here at Cape Cod Community College. I am Professor Tom Schaefer. I'd like to go ahead and first quote Professor Mike Fournier by saying, "We hope these monthly readings with working authors will provide refuge from the storm and space for everyone in our community to sail the creative seas." I thought that was pretty great last time, so I wanted to read that to everybody again. Hopefully tonight can be a good distraction for all of us, and we can have some great time listening to some awesome poetry. I'd like to quickly thank the Creative Writing Club, as well as the Language and Literature Department here at the college for sponsoring our night. I'd like to thank also Dean Kathy McCarran, Professors Rebecca Griffin and Mike Fournier, as well as Vanna Trudeau, and those working behind the scenes for the Tilden Center for making this all possible. What we're going to do as people are still filtering in, you see people are kind of filtering in, but Vanna's done a great job. Part of our great opportunity here tonight is to be able to offer some excellent prizes, especially with our students in mind. So I'd like to ask a couple of trivia questions, if I could. You could feel free to filter your answers into the chat. The first person to get the questions right will win a signed copy of No Arcadia, D. Eric Parkison's newest chapbook. So I want to ask a couple of questions here. I'm going to ask you two now, and then I'm going to ask you two towards the end of the night. So just do me a favor, make sure you have your chat open, and feel free to also Google this as well, because this is not stuff that you should know off the top of your head. Please don't. So question number one, Eric is an alum of the University of Rochester, having received his master's degree there. Which heroine of American politics lived much of her life in Rochester, famously registering to vote there in the election of 1872, and being the first female on a United States coin minted with her likeness in 1979. So I'll read it again for you in case you didn't catch it. Eric is an alum of the University of Rochester, having received his master's degree there. Which heroine of American politics lived much of her life in Rochester, famously registering to vote there in the election of 1872, and having the US coin minted with her likeness in 1979. So make sure you put your answer to the question in the chat. Feel free to Google that. Okay. Let's see if there's any good answers in there. Oh yeah, good. So we got some good answers. Nice, excellent, beautiful. And of course, Bruce Riley has the least useful answer out of anybody. I appreciate that, Bruce. That's really excellent. All right, second question. Eric is also an alum of Boston University, earning his MFA, his Master of Fine Arts there. And which other famous alum of the BU MFA program read her poem, Praise Song for the Day, at the inauguration of President Barack Obama in 2009? Make sure you put your answer into the chat. So I'll read it again. Eric is also an alum of Boston University, and actually is he's a teacher there as well. Earning his MFA, what other famous alum of the BU MFA program read her poem, Praise Song for the Day, at the inauguration of President Barack Obama in 2009? Make sure you submit it directly to me in the chat. I'm glad Mike could put Sinead O'Connor in the chat to everybody. Fantastic. Yes. I can foresee just, somebody shaving their head live right on this poetry reading now. Maybe I'll just toss an extra copy of the book to anybody who would like to shave their head live on the chat. No? Okay. All right, so there you go. Those are our questions. And what I'll do is I'll make sure I grab the correct people that have won, and I will ask you privately for your contact information. So we got a good amount of people here tonight, which is really exciting. So what we're going to do is first, I would like to introduce some student readers. So earlier today, Eric visited Professor Griffin's creative writing class. Professor Rebecca Griffin is our illustrious fall creative writing professor, and also the professor that leads our Sea Change magazine in the spring, hint, hint, plug, plug, for some discussion and exercise with poetry. Tonight, we'd like to highlight two of those students who have been part of our creative writing program here over the past year or so, who exemplify the grittiness of writing we all know and love. So, Professor Griffin.
Yes, it's my pleasure tonight to introduce JP Britt, who is a student in my creative writing class. And I really enjoyed the creative nonfiction piece that he's going to be reading tonight, and I think that you're going to enjoy it too. JP Britt is at 4Cs beginning a new career. This piece of writing that he's going to read tonight will explain what he's doing at 4Cs and why he came here. JP enjoys writing poetry about things that he has just witnessed. After 4Cs, he plans to transfer to either Tufts University or Amherst College.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, so the title is Career Changing Day. I didn't think that day in August 2018 would get to be that bad. The weather wasn't too horrible. Those gray skies with calm seas. Everything was typical. I was tired, hungry, and wanted to go home. Then all of a sudden, the captain and I both noticed a large, I'd say about 400-pound, dead leatherback sea turtle covered in ropes from lobster trap gear drifting in the tides of Nantucket Sound. The captain, a below average height and overweight man with a face as red as a lobster, couldn't have cared any less, even if you were paid to do so. I asked him, aren't we supposed to tell someone about this? He stared off into space with a grin on his face and said it would be stupid to report it because that would only bring more regulations to the job. We cruised by the dead turtle and the day went on. It was challenging to conceal my emotion of grief over what we had just seen. But at that point, I didn't think much of the captain's callous words or the overall morals that commercial fishermen I knew carried. As the workday went on, frustration caught up to me more and more. The day went on, trap after trap, monotonously arriving at the surface as I banned the claws of the lobsters, some of which were so large I thought they should be released back into the ocean. After seeing such a tragedy caused by the work that I was doing, everything seemed different. The weather seemed worse and more annoying than it actually was. Rather than thinking to myself about these clouds providing a great, cool overclass to that midsummer day, I thought of it as sad and gloomy. Besides my different perceptions of the weather, other things seemed off as well. The bait had a horrible stench. After all, it's minced fish skins, sometimes which were rotted. I could usually handle it, but on that day, it smelled worse than ever, to the point where I wanted to vomit. Also, the boat's gas fumes were unbearable when usually tolerable. Those unusual annoyances are based on the fact that commercial fishing gear just killed that 400-pound leatherback sea turtle. All of that may seem dramatic, but it wasn't any random fisherman's gear. It belonged to the boat and captain I worked for. This was easy to tell, not because only were the ropes wrapped around the turtle. Not only were the ropes wrapped around the turtle, our distinctive bright orange buoy was still attached to those very same ropes. Bored, annoyed, and tired, I stood on my post and began counting down the minutes to the day's end. And in the distance, about 1/10 of a nautical mile away, I saw a lobster trap buoy slowly bobbing in the water on the surface for 2 seconds, then being sucked down under for 7. I knew it was either a turtle or a seal and alerted the captain of my sighting. It was again a leatherback sea turtle, just like the one we saw a few hours prior, but it was alive. Was saving this turtle the salvation I was looking for to make the guilt of the already dead turtle go away? As we pulled up to the slow bobbing buoy, it became clear it was a turtle entangled in lobster trap gear. It wasn't a good sight. Ropes entangling his or her entire body got caught in the crossfire of a vicious game of cat's cradle. It seemed like the turtle could have been stuck in the gear for at least 24 hours due to the deep chafing all around the body caused by the ropes attached to the traps. At first, I didn't know what to think or do. I was told by the captain, who was showing no emotion at all, that we would slowly drive the boat up to the beast and patiently cut the rope until it was completely disentangled. As we pulled up to the scene, my heart was pounding. We were close enough to see the color of the turtle's eyes. I could see fear and pain. It was almost as if his face was saying help. As the captain controlled the steering wheel, I spent the next 15 minutes slowly and carefully cutting the rope off the turtle section by section. Throughout the rescue, the turtle, being very afraid, was continuously trying to dive underwater in a defensive manner. When it came to the surface, its big flippers would lightly slap me and splash water into my face. On top of that, I couldn't swiftly cut the rope as would in a nearby any other situation. I had to cut very slowly in order to free the turtle without causing any further lacerations. Rather than being annoyed by the turtle slapping and splashing, it was quite enjoyable given the fact that I was rescuing such a beautiful creature. The rescue was successful. Although the turtle had a few lacerations from the ropes, it swam away in a healthy carriage into the green sea. I didn't make it visible through emotions or facial expressions, but inside, I knew that this type of work was no longer for me. To me, it seemed like all fishermen were the same. My boss couldn't have cared less about the actual rescue. He only cared about rescuing the turtle so that I would not be reported as entangled, or even worse, dead. It was virtuous to have saved such a wicked beast such as a leatherback turtle. Still, after that August 2018 day, I realized I'd be in a better position to help marine mammals through environmental law and policy. Unfortunately, not enough is being done by the government to support marine life throughout the Commonwealth, so hopefully someday I'm able to make a difference. The end.
The rawness is it's definitely visceral, especially thinking about the scene of the beach and then thinking about the heartlessness of a boss. Luckily, we don't have that kind of thing here.
No, but that's my favorite part too.
That's great, man. Thank you. Our second reader tonight is Paul Calder. Paul is going to be reading one poem for us tonight. I wanted to simultaneously plug that Paul is the president of our creative writing club here on campus. Our club meets on Thursdays at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I see Vanna putting up the picture there, of course. Thank you very much. And you can go ahead and either email myself or you could email Paul to be able to get the information for the club. I'll go ahead and put that information into the chat for you in a second here. Paul Calder is currently living in Norwell, Massachusetts, and is a licensed journeyman and master electrician, and more recently, a stay-at-home dad. Most importantly, stay-at-home dad. He graduated from Chatham High School in 1998 and returned to school recently to work towards an associate's degree in English. In his free time, he plays in multiple wooden bat baseball leagues on the Cape and in the Boston area. Paul lives a life that I think many of us would actually really enjoy. So Paul, please.
All right, so the title of my poem is called Home. William stood upon the burning meadow, holding the head of the terrible beast, and it had rent the land to a fiery flame. Rejoice, he said, victory at least. And a specter crept through the field with a step that made William drop his family sword. But what good have you done for the kingdom, but lay it bare upon the butcher's board? William looked around and saw the blasted earth that the dragon had laid bare that morning. What good have I done for my kingdom if it lays broken, butchered, and burnt? Thank you.
Paul, thank you very much. I want to introduce Eric now, but something that I also want to kind of introduce is, for those of you who have never really been to a poetry reading before, especially virtually, this is just kind of strange to begin with, right? But for those of you who have never really attended a poetry reading before, it's very different from going to a fiction reading where the writer will go ahead and read probably a long swath of writing, and then at the end everybody claps and then there's some discussion about it. For poetry, it's a little bit more awkward. It's one of those things where, of course, you're reading the poem for a minute, 2 minutes, depending on how long it takes and how the reader is using cadence and those other things. And then there's typically no clapping in between. It would get tiresome, after a while. So what a lot of poets will do is that in between poems, they'll kind of work you into the next poem and create this sense of narrative and give you an idea of why they're feeling the way that they do when writing the poem, or where the poem came from, or different kind of backstory to the poem. I bring that up because at a recent reading where Eric was, we were kind of talking about the awkwardness of how that feels, especially, and then especially with Zoom itself, just the muteness that's usually across the faces of people anyway. So to introduce Eric, D. Eric Parkison is the author of the chapbook No Arcadia, released by James Boy Press in August of 2020. And his work has been published in, among other places, American Chordata, ZYZYVA or Ziziva, the Tishman Review, Antigonish Review, and Hawk and Whippoorwill. Parkison received his MA in English from the University of Rochester, as we mentioned before, and his MFA in poetry from Boston University. Please welcome to our Zoom reading to the Bigger Boat Visiting Writer Series, D. Eric Parkison.
Thank you. Oh, it's too much. Thank you, everyone. It really is really excellent to be here, and I want to thank Tom for inviting me, and thank everybody involved in putting this kind of a thing together. I think that it's really special and exciting that these things are able to continue happening, that we're still seeking community, even in this time where doing so in physical spaces is a little more difficult. So I'm going to read a handful of poems to you. I'm going to awkwardly banter in between them. And I hope that we have a good time. Last time I read the reading that Tom was at, I've been playing with kind of trying to find different ways through my own book, in a way, kind of testing my own ideas about what the book is and how it will work, or how it is working. And so tonight I'm going to try another kind of sequencing, but I won't bore you with the details of how I'm thematically connecting these things. Instead, I'll only say that the book involves itself or considers life in a rural place, a place kind of outside of the big city centers, and it picks up on, I hope, some of the pressures, the paradoxes, and hopefully some of the pleasures that exist in life in those sorts of places. And I think that it, man, if you're looking at the electoral map this evening, or refreshing it over and over again, you can see this kind of place. It is illustrated in bright red, and I'm always kind of conflicted about that. But I'll begin with the first poem in the book, called Not Asleep, Not Awake. I had hoped for this poem to kind of bring the reader into the book through a kind of space that is dreamy and atmospheric, and let the reader know kind of right off the bat that you'll be in physical spaces, but you might not be there physically. That it's the experience, I hope, is as much kind of psychological or emotional as it is an experience of a physical place. Not asleep, not awake. In summer, the one air conditioner is shared. You sleep on the floor in the air-conditioned room, his silence, his room. You wake because there's a presence before he starts. See the curtain, the pale moon, again his breathing. Each inhale pulls deep like collecting burrs drawing a bullnose plane along fresh boards of white pine, like pulling off soft strips of birch bark. When he begins again, you cinch your breath to his. Sleep, his dominion, his country. You, at the edge of a cool wood, go in. Here it is, the awkward space. We're all in it together for a moment. Let me just turn to the page. Here it is, I have it before me, and the experience is over. This is a little damaged love song, I hope, called Like the Best Pop Songs You've Ever Heard, Oh, Oh, Oh. She does not ask what she might need from my touch. She turns away from me. Watch all the resilient weeds. How they wither will say how sour the ground has become, walked over by love and follower. See the spaces between the trees, crossed by flitting things, poor wills, sparrows, while I wish for sameness of life and love and being loved. I bet in town the people get to dawn and say to know is thought's arthritis. Say it is better to walk through leaves, better that she turns and I follow between the oaks in the old oak grove. When I was a kid, when I was growing up, there was a real fascination. I mean, I think you're going to sense kind of a theme in my commentary tonight. I, like many of us, have been kind of glued to the various screens trying to figure out what the hell is going to happen with the country. And so anyway, that is just to say that part of the way that this next poem works or was thinking is that when I was growing up, there was a fascination among almost every adult man that I knew in my community with World War II. It was this time when everything was done well, everything was done correctly, and everything was done with this righteousness and this ethic behind it. And so I kind of I borrowed imagery and language from that and then mixed it into just visuals and experiences that are some are like mine and some are not. But anyway, so that's where the title comes from. It's called Allied Territory. Allied Territory. Wet clover and patches of grass would grow to nag the driveway stones and call the bees to interrupt our games of pig or horse. They'd spread like stains each spring, go orange and white with flowers, breaking what I thought was one idea into many disparate things. A proof that what we planned would always fail. The plane on which our first campaigns were launched, with water guns or gasoline or sticks, we would begin our march against the nests. The place where fathers came to pick us up against our wills each Friday afternoon. The driveway to the farmhouse where we lived, near the north end of a road with two names, outside a town too small to make a noise when Durkee's closed or Nixon's roof collapsed. All those insurgencies of weeds and grass could stand for that as well. They shouldered up between the stones, occupied the edges to prove our claims had been provisional. A stubborn boy might pry out clumps of grass by kicking at the dirt on autumn days when darkness follows close the morning sun, or slam a basketball against one spot. But come next spring, the grass will grow again, and the plow guy who came all winter long, a helpful neighbor from just down the street, will have pushed the bigger stones into the yard, a further blurring of the boundary line, the delaying action masking a retreat. Much of this book is kind of interested with or anxious about or thinking about different forms and different ways to approach the materials of these poems in hopes of making something that that has music at the heart of it as much as content in some way, or they share space together somehow. And in this one, this is a poem called Thrash, and I think here you'll kind of notice pretty immediately what the musical element is, or I hope anyway that it's audible. Thrash. Home from his last tour, the old man eyes me cautiously from the table where he stays. He strikes if I come close. The state crews are out all night, knocking down the toxic hogweed. I pass through the screen door, walk into the orchard. I start my truck out back of Spencer's barn. The road I pop up onto is dark and lined with hogweed. Ropey sealant glistens, snaking in the headlights. Furnace road goes through the countryside. I take the truck along a field. It's turned and edged with hogweed. The soybean sprouts drink up the irrigation. This love plus suffering is some new season. The brake lights light the billowed dust, red as blisters from the hogweed. Deer plunge into the night, hop each ridge and furrow. Their thrash is plain reaction. It's that or else the vultures eat. Big rocks and piles at each end of the field, dusted white as all the hogweed. I want to be handsome, not to be a better man, and there's no way to master such a broken thing. The stones that ping the oil pan spring off into the hogweed. This is such an incredible silence. So those are the poems of the kind of my first conceptual section here. And so I will be moving on momentarily to approach the book yet again. And I should mention, and I'll try to show to everyone, my wife and we've been in a relationship for many years. She's known me since I was pretty young, high school age, and so I went to her when I had the opportunity to build this book, and asked for photographs that might respond to the material or think about the material a little bit. And so before I read this next poem, I really want to show the image that she took, and I'll kind of hold it up. So yeah, there's glare all over it. I guess that's not working so well, but the publisher, the press was gracious enough to let me do this weird thing by putting this full two-page photo spread in here. And the moment that this photo captures is the same as the moment that I started thinking about this poem, that thinks about kind of how natural places and landscape is treated in our kind of industrial agricultural age. So this next poem is called Little Calabasas, and I hope it's at least as vibrant as that photograph. Little Calabasas. The harrow's rows of roller discs are tacky with a dark mortar. Long grasses, clay, and black loam, dewfall wetted. The tractor, off a quarter hour, smells hot. Deer eyes shine in this outer world. Raccoons shuffle fatly. Brown bats begin to tumble overhead. To traipse this shorn landscape, to watch under a deflating sun, ashes scatter from bulldozed piles of brush, broken roots, pine boles ringed with broken branches, is to trespass. Trespass, to watch smoke drift over the black pond. Each wisp unravels, barrel rolls into soft pills, then nothing, swallowed water. The wood hisses, turning to embers under a gray crosshatch of contrails. This next is a kind of an attempt at a sonnet, and I think it follows some of the rules, and I think it breaks some others. And it's called Staying Over. We played with the rotary dial on the pink phone, lifted the earpiece from its mount on the cupboard. His mother turned on the tap, which choked and sputtered, spitting bay water into the pan. Then he rolled an egg along the checkered tablecloth, delicate as a sphere of dried paint. This, he said, is the one day of the year this will work. At attention, broad-shouldered, the egg stood on tippy toes. Science or art, for him, it didn't matter. Same difference. That night, top bunk, I had a dream. I wrenched out my teeth. I took my mouth apart, rolled from the mattress in terror, afraid I'd cracked my head along its fresh seam. One real disappointment of not having a reading in a physical space is I always love the thing where somebody has to bring out water for the guest because the guest has forgotten their water bottle. And now here I am, and I've got my own glass of water. And I have to refill it myself if I want to refill it. And so that's a real disappointment. Someday, someone will serve me water. I'm going to read just a handful more. This next one I'd like to read to you is it is an elegy for my younger brother who passed away with his girlfriend in 2007, and so you know it's one of those things where things that are kind of very emotionally fraught for an individual, it's hard to find a way to speak about them. And I was pretty convinced and remain convinced that, as I spoke in Professor Griffin's class this afternoon, we were talking about kind of how to make objects speak, or how to make them kind of elements of an emotional field. And the thing that I landed on for this poem was this odd device that I'll take a second to describe, just because I think very few people have probably encountered it. It's called a potato grater, and this one that was in the basement of my parents' barn when I was a kid. It was just this long wooden machine that had something that looked like a belt made of chain link fence, I suppose you might describe it, and then a hand crank at one end. And so somebody would pour potatoes down a ramp onto this belt, and small potatoes would fall through and larger potatoes would make it to the end and be collected. And that was the way of sorting those potatoes. And so this poem kind of picks up on that machine and that image and tries to make it speak on my behalf in memory of my younger brother. So this is called Potato Grater Elegy. No engine, no belt drive. Even then, Wayne County people wouldn't spend money to burn gas. No. For a few blisters, with a little muscle ache, for a few dark mornings in the weeks after the digging, they could do it themselves. No sense in being wasteful. We climbed down the hay chute into the basement of the barn, dropped to the floor, straddled the manure gutter behind the stanchions, the water dishes rusted stuck on their pivots. We crawled over mounds of clapboard, kindling for the winter, nails popping in the fire. Simple, a hand crank. The flat planes of the roller first kinked, then caught the chain link track, the conveyor. I turned the handle. My little brother rode the belt, arms up to keep his fingers clear of the rollers, hopped off at the other end. Baby reds and fingerlings would have fallen through and gathered underneath. Grade A's would make it, be collected in a rough sack, sold for little. The people before us knew not to want more than you can have. He has been ashes for 8 years. I never learn. I like the things that keep me big. Pizza, white cake, cold bottles of good beer, late conversations, little sleep. He is where he is. I keep what I can. I think I'm going to read 4 more poems, each of them relatively short. So we near the end, my friends. This piece is a little tonally different, and I think that it is, for me, it's sort of like the point in the book that might be either the not the lowest point for any kind of speaker, but the point at which the crisis that the speaker in some of these poems has been experiencing is brought to its point of highest tension. And after this, we kind of leave the book. Maybe we come back up from the underworld in a little way. So this poem is called Winter Cropland. I fled the devil where he stood among the turning crows over the tired field. Caw, they call, I feel an answer in me, gathered in my stomach. I am made of a terrible substance, old, hotter than the dribbling shit of fever, strangling deliverer. I am brittle, bright finger, I am a grafting, a child. Cloak me, Father. Mother, love me, I have done wrong. Corn stubble stuck in crusted snow, row on row of corn through which the crows caw and pick, crushed kernels pinched in black beaks, flat black, like the cleft of a goat's hoof. My mouth tastes too much of salt. this little poem called Natural Laws might be something like the anthem of this book, I think. Natural Laws. We cut the vine off at the ground and said, "This is liberation," pushed off with the vine clutched in our hands. Its dead fingers let go the branches, and we crash landed on a wet bank thick with ferns. This was our generation. The failures from which we learned made it easy to stay down and cry, made it hard to stand. I'm going to read for you two more brief poems. As I said earlier, this book is kind of interested in form and what form might still offer to a writer in an era, in a time when form is really contested as a concept, and there's a feeling that its energies might have been exhausted at some point in the 19th century, I suppose. But I disagree. This piece thinks about that thing that people experience when they go back to a place that they've been gone from for a long time, and thinks about how places that have felt like, that have been formative for us, are now suddenly in a different relationship to us, and they've expelled us in some way, maybe. This one's called "On Visiting with a High School Friend." We walked the woods where we'd been young, to smell the spruce in autumn's chill, and climbed the roots slung rung by rung across the path up a steep hill. We marveled at all that had stayed the same, and walked back by the way we came. We took off our boots and put on shoes. Our place was no longer ours to use. And this last poem is called Recusatio, and it plays with a concept from I think Roman era poetry, where a poet might start by saying, I was supposed to write an epic poem, but I can't do it, so here's a few lyrics. The poem kind of snottily says, this was my task, but I've come on something better. So this starts thinking about the pressure of thinking, and then turns in a different direction. Thank you everyone again for coming out to this. Recusatio. Hemlock cleaves to our breath when we ask. Still, we listen everywhere and say, tell me the world. We search the books and say, tell me the world. Walk with the one you love, through the leaves, beside the water. Declare, we will not know the world, as the sentence that is your life courses towards its end. It is only one, in a story not ever to be read. Thank you, everybody.
Ooh, can we have other people like unmute too, and we'll like breathe together so we know that we're alive and kill some of that awkwardness?
Thank you very much.
Wonderful. I'm glad I came.
Oh man, that was fantastic, Eric. Thank you so much. What's funny is I was thinking to myself earlier that I wanted to introduce you more. Remember we talked about, and then I just jumped right over. I'm like, let's get the guy to read. It's fantastic. So I'll kick it to the question. But before we get to to the Q&A portion. Again, thank you everybody for coming tonight. This is a really fantastic turnout to see people after, I think something happened yesterday, I'm not entirely sure, but it's good to see a bunch of people on a random Wednesday. And I wanted to give a little plug to our December visiting writer. Dr. Amy Brady will actually be here Wednesday, December 2nd. So that is the first, I believe that's the first Wednesday of December, Wednesday, December 2nd. Same time, you will be invited pretty much the same way through registration. Dr. Amy Brady is, like everybody else that we're gonna have in the Bigger Boat writing series, is she's a pretty big deal. She writes about arts, culture, and the environment. She's the deputy publisher of Guernica magazine and the editor-in-chief of the Chicago Review of Books, where she writes a monthly column called Burning Worlds. I don't want to give too much away, but she has this really great anthology coming out in 2021, House on Fire, Dispatches from a Climate Changed World. And she will be actually doing mostly a discussion about the publishing industry, the publishing world. So for anybody who's really interested in kind of just talking about that or hearing about that, she's somebody who writes, I think, Mike, it's Cli-Fi, right?
Yeah, she's an advocate of Cli-Fi, which is fiction that concerns itself with climate change. Which
is such not only a very timely niche of writing, but also something that is really interesting to see the art of it actually happen on the page. So that's definitely something that we want to get you out here for. And then before we get into some questions, so by the way, if you have some questions for Eric, please filter them, send them directly to me into the chat box, and we'll get through some questions. I have two more trivia questions for you. So first of all, congratulations to Professor Henry McClintock for knowing Susan B. Anthony, and for Eleanor Gubbins for knowing that Elizabeth Alexander was the poet reader for Barack Obama in 2009. So I have two more questions. And again, these are sort of Eric related, but they're not. So pretend it's like a math question. Just listen to the real part of the question. The word Arcadia, so this is question one. The word Arcadia is defined as a type of pastoral utopia, though not entirely for human civilization. All right, that's the part you forget. What famous Roman poet wrote his series of poems titled Eclogues, set in Arcadia? What famous Roman poet wrote his famous series of poems Eclogues in Arcadia? I really wish you all could see some of the chat. Google it, come on, just Google it. Eclogue, just type in Eclogues in Google, people, come on. I wrote these questions myself. This is my backup career, to be a trivia DJ at some point. What famous Roman poet wrote his series of poems titled Eclogues, set in Arcadia? And then the second question to end the night, in the spirit of Eric's poem, Mill Creek, which US state has apple cider as its official state beverage? What US state has apple cider as its official state beverage? Check out these answers. Nice. Good. Awesome. All right, cool, very good. So what we'll do now is we'll open the rest of the time to Q&A, but again, thank you all for coming. This is a fantastic night to not only spend some time together here after probably what was a long day for many people yesterday, but also to listen to some really great poetry. And the one thing that I wanted to bring up, and I guess I'll start some of the Q&A stuff, is just how, Robert Pinsky has, the former poet laureate of the United States, has characterized Eric's poetry. I think he used the word crunchy, which is just like such a nice word Not only is it great to have Robert Pinsky of all people talk about your poetry, but then he uses crunchy. I like the word unctuous. When I read your poems, I just feel like there's this flavor to the words and the language you use. In a part of one of his poems, A Permanent Garment, it says, "The fork with the heavy wrist rests in the tack of a messy plate, timed toward 3 if it were the face of a clock." And just like the movement of the mouth and the tongue and everything, it's so nice. I don't know, what's the real question? How do you do that? Like, how does that just kind of come into your, does that just come into your head in that way? Or do you just, where does that language come from?
Actually, I spoke about this poem with Rebecca in her class this afternoon. We were talking about the idea that for me, that poem specifically, A Permanent Garment, seemed to me kind of uncharacteristic of my own work, in that it is maybe even more than other places kind of invested in sound. I think that when you're trying to write good and convincing poetry, that you'll take up anything that will help, anything that will work. And the experiment with that poem really started with the sound of that first line. I don't recall how it came to me, except that there is some boring actuality. I was staring at a plate after I had eaten breakfast. And so I wanted to kind of proceed in that poem by sound, rather than what is kind of often the way I do things, kind of overthinking about something and proceeding from there. But I think that in terms of the sounds of my language in the poems, that that I really want to, I mean, it sounds silly or cheesy to say it like this, but I can't rephrase right now, but like something like honor the ancestors or something like that. I mean, the English iambic pentameter is almost always in my head. It is foundational to my thinking about poetry, and it's just that bouncing rhythm with a kind of thickness to the clusters of consonants and stuff, really came to underwrite the way I wanted to sound and do things. I think for precursors, there might be Bunting in Brig Flats, a book that's really, to borrow Robert's term, crunchy, and thinking about especially the sounds of kind of like the language that comes to us from like the Anglo-Saxon parts of English. They're really hard words and monosyllabic and thick and guttural, and I like it. Is that okay?
Yeah, man, that's perfect. That's
Will that do? Yeah.
Yeah, I want you to know that you have been referred to as gangsta in the chat privately to me. You're
I am nothing if not gangsta.
Perfect. So Professor Griffin actually has, she's so much better at articulating her thoughts than I am. Eric's writing is so contemplative, and we are living in a time that lends itself to contemplation. How has your poetry changed, or has it changed, since the start of COVID, since COVID began?
This is an interesting question. I think that one thing to say about it is that I'm sort of, as an individual human being, sort of chronically underemployed, always looking for work and something to do. And so in that way, I was relatively fortunate at the beginning of COVID to have just tons of spare time where the pressure of finding something was a little bit relieved, because it felt like, well, there's no way to find something anyway. And so I get to kind of turn away from that that world of kind of capitalist earning, and just focus. And so I've written a lot this year, and not much of it is very good, but it was an opportunity to just kind of work some muscles. I started by writing a lot of pentameter. My friend Joseph is here tonight, and he had this brilliant idea of starting a kind of an online writing group, keeping us accountable to each other, and kind of mercilessly torturing us and prompting us and prodding us to try different things. And so as I said earlier, this idea of kind of anything to hand, I have been doing those kind of practice runs through rigorously formal, iambic pentameter quatrains and stuff like that. And then also had the opportunity to be in groups that were trying things like laying face down on a couch, not looking at what you're writing, and trying to connect to your body and trying to figure out what your left shoulder might say, if it didn't have to speak as a part of you, but could just speak as a left shoulder. And it's challenging and engaging, and it reminds me of this little a little quip I heard as part of another poet's presentation one time. He said that Meyer Shapiro, this is getting way into the weeds, but he said that there was this art critic and poet, Meyer Shapiro, and he was kind of facing off or arguing with the mid-century new formalist critic, R.P. Blackmer. And R.P. Blackmer said something to him like, Meyer, you New York poets, you guys all think you're so smart. And Meyer said to him, I'm recounting somebody else's anecdote, but whatever. Meyer said to him, yes, well, RP, when you use your mind, you don't use your mind up, right? It's a constantly renewable resource, and our job as poets and writers, but as human beings, is to be, I think, continuously in the world as much as possible, in the world of thought, in the world of analysis and contemplation. If I couldn't think about the world, if I had to live the kind of life that many millions or billions of people have to live, lives of like those deer and thrash, plain reaction, or else the vultures eat. If I had to live that way, I don't think I would thrive. So I've circled all the way back around. I've been very fortunate, and I'll keep doing it because I'm pompous enough to believe that I can keep doing it.
That's a pretty important thing to say, for sure, is that whole idea of, I love the way you talk about, flexing the muscle, but and just acknowledging that a lot of sometimes what we do is just terrible, but like we're still flexing the muscle, that's, I think that's definitely a lesson that a lot of younger writers, by younger, I don't mean age, I just mean people that are early in their journey, have to kind of understand and work on. That's awesome. Speaking of which, somebody did ask, how much time every week do you spend writing anyway? Is it something that you see as full-time, or how much writing do you do?
During this fall semester, it's been a lot less because, again, that world of earning has kind of reimposed its daily regimens on me. But I was for a period trying to very simply give 1 to 2 hours per morning to writing. And doing that, you produce a lot, and sometimes you also sit staring at the piece of paper before you for 45 minutes because you have no clue even how to start. And I think that Tom, is a really important lesson for younger writers as well, that it really is just about doing it, you're not always, no, never mind. I won't fly into a sports metaphor because then I would have to pretend that I know something about sports. But
not a sportsing guy, no?
Can you believe it? Yeah, but I mean, you have to make writing a sort of muscle memory kind of thing. Like it's simply the way you respond to the world. I'm not good, as some people are, at kind of like keeping a little notebook with them and writing down lines as they come or whatever. Instead, my practice has mainly been, this is the time for writing, let me sit down and try to do it. And even that I do imperfectly, intermittently. I said to myself a few weeks ago, after the election, and so I'm still hoping to kind of reimpose some kind of rules on myself about writing.
So speaking of rules, actually, to piggyback off that, it's almost like we're just going through this great narrative of questions here. Before the poem is ready, how many rewrites, how many revisions? Do you have some kind of a rule? How does that work for you?
I'm kind of like one of those tinkerer kind of poets. Like, when I look through this, I'm not buy it, but I've seen a few, you know what I mean? I've seen like a few lines or words where I've thought to myself, was that best? Is that it? So all that to say, I just feel like I'm kind of like a constant picker, and I can't really, I can't be okay with the notion of the finished poem, it's kind of frustrating. I have a dear friend who, she has imposed a rule on herself about revisions, which is every time she writes a poem, she will allow herself only 3 revisions in the entire piece. I mean, removing a comma counts as one. So the drafting process for her is this intensely rigorous process, whereas for me, because I say I allow myself 1,000 changes per minute ad infinitum for the rest of time for this poem, I can be very messy with my drafts. Go ahead and leave it all on the field. We're back to the sports metaphor.
So you're pulling a Walt Whitman. You're just going to revise this thing ad nauseum or until death.
Yeah.
Basically, there you go. You just die with the pen in your hand. Nice. Good.
I'm lucky. Yeah.
Did you I'm like bouncing around the questions here. Did you find the MFA? And for those of us who maybe are unsure, and you can help describe yours a little bit. My MFA program was a 2-year program, whereas yours. So can you describe the BUMFA program real quick?
Yeah, I mean, it's really accelerated. It's a 1-year program, and then they offer this wonderful opportunity afterwards. There's a funder, somebody in Boston, who gives you essentially a scholarship right after you've kind of completed your coursework, and says to you basically, go out of the country and stay out as long as you can. And for me, that was like a month and a half, almost 2 months. But it feels like an extension of the program because there are certain kind of like strings attached. You should be writing, you should be continuing your work. You might even, maybe you should be communicating with this individual. Very, very unique. And I would say that my MFA experience was that, the BU program specifically is very literary, it felt to me uninterested in some ways in the kind of business of being alive and only interested in the business of being a living writer. And I really enjoyed that quite a bit. I think that what I wish I knew before I started thinking about MFA programs, and maybe this is insightful to some, maybe it's like, yeah, duh, idiot, to others, but I wish I had thought a little bit more about the fact that the faculty kind of create the atmosphere there. And so when you're looking for a writing program, you shouldn't look for, oh, this isn't a cool location, or, oh, I think that I'd have fun in this city or whatever. Instead, you should be thinking, if you want to be serious about the writing, what are these writers producing? Do I respect it? Do I love it? And do I think that we would have something to say to each other about our work? I've spoken with some folks. For example, I was thinking about the program in Ann Arbor, Michigan as well, which is a 3-year long program. And so, how much time do I want to commit to this? And I was speaking to somebody who had gone, who really loathed the program because she was more experimental in her poetic tastes, more conceptual, more abstract, and fine, produce great work that way, but that's not the Ann Arbor program. And so it's really good to think ahead about who you would want to share work with and think about work with.
Yeah, and part of that other question too was, how prepared did you feel leading up to it? When you started applying for the programs, how fully formed did you think you were prior to getting into the program? Did the degree help you? Those types of things.
Oh, shit. I still don't think I'm fully formed. I have no clue how to answer that question. I think that, everybody's life experience is just their life experience. When I applied to the BU program, it was an act of desperation after, I think, 4 or 5 years of applying to various MFAs and PhDs and getting nothing but rejections. I was working at no, that's not true. I was going to say that I was accepted to a PhD program in Georgia and was at that time working at a grocery store, minimum wage work. And for political and financial reasons, the folks at that program basically wrote me privately and said, "Congratulations on being accepted. Don't come here. It's not worth it." And so it was, yeah, I mean, the one thing that remains our reality, folks, is that the world is constantly changing. So anyway, so that was extremely depressing to me. I was miserable for a few years and just bouncing around between various low-paying jobs and had no clue how to proceed. I applied to a handful of writing workshops and was lucky enough to get into a writing workshop called the Squaw Valley Community of Writers Workshop, north of kind of the Bay Area in California. And then a few years later, the Kenyon Review Workshop, which was in Ohio. And just had conversations, honest and raw and real conversations with people leading those workshops who were also faculty members at various programs. And, they buoyed me up when I didn't really have confidence myself. And so in a last ditch effort, I said one more year of applying and received entrance to the BU program.
What it takes sometimes, right? Is that
It
that
takes
one,
some time.
that feeling as though you're hitting bottom before you really get into it. So
Oh yeah.
I'm going to ask, I think, one or two good questions left here. There's lots of good questions. I'm saying with time, there's only time for.
Oh, right.
Okay, so speaking of like really feeling it, here's a good question for you. Okay, I don't envy you having to answer this question. Do you find it takes a different kind of summoning to speak a poem of deep feeling, like the one about your brother?
That's an interesting question. I think that the summoning that happens there is inevitable because of my personal commitment and attachment to that specific material. Like I said earlier, these poems kind of run the gamut from to put kind of obnoxious categories on them, from fiction to nonfiction in some way. And I think that when I am reading that poem in particular, with many of the poems, you're able, I think, to kind of sing them. You kind of put your consciousness on pause to read the words to the people so they can hear it. And then with a poem of that nature, that experience is just so written into my DNA that my whole body attends the reading of that poem. And is that a strength or weakness? Is that a good thing or bad thing? I can't really say. It's just simply what's true. It is. I think the risk that it runs is that the emotional investment I have in the poem can become kind of a rhetoric in defense of the poem rather than the poem speaking for itself. I hope that the poem speaks for itself, but that's for others to decide, I think, and not for me to decide.
Beautiful. I'm going to kind of ask like one final all-encompassing, grab some of the last stuff, because I've had people ask about, like, are you writing on paper, like writing about place? People asking about if you have family, do you have kids? How does that inform like your writing? So basically, like, just to kind of pull all those things together, what is it really that helps you make writing choices, I guess? Is it the world around you? Is it familial things? Is it one of the people was asking specifically about things like form? Like, are you choosing form on purpose, or are you like, so what's really informing how you make choices in your writing?
Man, oh boy, that's a lot. I would say
the last one though, so don't worry.
Okay. I guess I would reiterate what I said earlier, the idea of kind of like anything to hand. Currently, no, I do not have children, and I'm sure that would create certain pressures and different, you'd have a different investment in the time you have to write or something like that. And so for now, I do write on paper for my first draft. The way it often works for me is that I always draft in a notebook on paper with pen first. I suppose I'm to a certain extent a kind of a Luddite, but I do believe somehow in some kind of real magic that happens in that connection between the hand and the pen and the paper. I like doing that because sometimes I get to scribble or cross a word out or make my L have a bigger loop than it usually has. I get to be kind of aesthetically invested in the letters and words somehow, I guess. And I think that, like, I have a lot of friends that write and draft on computer, and it's a different process because I think in part because you're editing as you go along. You're able to like click a word and drop in the thesaurus response to it or whatever. Not to denigrate it. Again, whatever works. But I will stick to paper and pen. Form. I think that the relationship to form is constantly changing and kind of constantly under pressure. I said this, Tom, you'll probably remember, but at Bunker Hill, I was talking about this a little bit, that I had this really extraordinary experience where I had been reading the poetry of William Wordsworth for a long period of time. I'd just been focusing on his work, and now I'm about to reveal myself as a liar about my last part of the answer. So I was walking my dog and a line came into my mind. I did not have my pen and paper, folks, so I started typing it into my cell phone. And so I was about to say tweeted it to myself, but that's not true. I texted it to myself. And then when I got home, I copied it down off of the text, and I looked at it, and it with 2 changes, it had been written, it had come out of me as a sonnet. And to me, like, it's still a sonnet that's unpublished, that I still have work to do on, but the experience of having just kind of spoken in a form felt so kind of magical and interesting to me that I kind of chased that feeling a little bit. I think that those shapes, those traditional, sometimes kind of old-fashioned stanza shapes, that they are maybe to a certain extent kind of written into our DNA a little bit. You can hear it when kids make sounds. They love rhyme words. They love kind of silly, bouncing rhythms. And I think that the attitude is that form is a series of limitations you're placing on yourself, rather than a series of channels that you're kind of allowing whatever writerly force you have to flow into and to be strengthened in that way by their concentration, by the limits of the structure in some way. Is that all of it?
That's great, man.
Anything else?
I think I speak for everybody here by saying, just in general, thank you. Your presence, your words, the heart that you put into the answers, everything that you brought us today has been so great. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody.
So that's that's it, everybody. That's the end of Bigger Boat Part 2, or Part Duh, as, as the early 90s comedy movies would say to us. Remember, December 2nd, Wednesday, December 2nd at 6:30, we will welcome Dr. Amy Brady for our conversation. So be sure to keep your eyes out for that. The registration link will be coming out soon to you, and hopefully we'll see you all then. Have a great night.